The Detroit Pistons have been known as one of the worst franchises in the NBA over the last decade and a half, as they have struggled to build a consistently competitive roster. But their front office has made some smart decisions over the last couple of years, which has put them in the right direction moving forward. That is not to say the Pistons are building the next dynasty, but they are making the right decisions and smart decisions that are going under the radar, that are making them head in the right direction, or is making this team a competitive roster in the Eastern Conference once again. So let's talk about it. First off, the most important part is the Pistons committed to a full-scale rebuild. For a while during their time with Stan Van Gundy and their first year with Dwayne Casey, the Pistons held on to being a mediocre team that was fighting for the 8 seed. Them and Orlando, they were just kind of hanging out for the 8 seed in mediocrity. But they finally realized that this team wasn't going any higher than that, and it was time to rebuild. They traded away Andre Drummond, bought out Blake Griffin, and committed to youth, committed to rebuilding, and actually got themselves in a position to have good chances of acquiring high caliber young assets. You could certainly argue that they could have and should have started rebuilding earlier. In fact, that's probably my agreement as well. But they had just acquired Blake only a couple years before. They were hoping that they could get a little bit more out of this group. But inevitably, they did eventually realize that a rebuild was the best direction to go. They committed to it and allowed themselves to have that opportunity to acquire high-end draft picks and future assets, something some other organizations have refused and continue to refuse to do. Most notably Portland and Indiana to an extent, although they finally made some changes at the deadline, thankfully. Secondly, and most importantly in my opinion, to the Detroit Pistons' success as far as a good front office goes, has been as how they've been willing to take low-risk chances on players that have not found success in other organizations, whose values are low, who are former high draft picks, that they're willing to pick up, and they bring in these guys on low value and increase their value, either for their own benefit on their roster or for further moves down the road. Trey Lyles was signed as a free agent and then was used in the trade to acquire Marvin Bagley, who we're about to talk about in a second, who's another low-value player at the time, who it looks like they're already only a few games in, probably going to increase his value. Trey Lyles was a former lottery pick. They took a chance, increased his value, and used him to bring in another asset. Josh Jackson, a former top 5 pick, was signed as a free agent a couple years ago, and although he hasn't necessarily been consistent or amazing, he has been much better in Detroit than he has been for most of his career and has shown some positive flashes throughout his time as a Detroit Piston. Dennis Smith Jr., as another former lottery pick, was acquired along with the second-round pick for a veteran impending free agent and Derrick Rose. He was not going to be returning there, and they managed to get another young asset. Now, did it turn out? Not really, but the idea that they're willing to try and bring guys in who are low in value, who have upside, or at least had upside, is smart moves to be making as a small market team trying to improve your roster. Jeremy Grant is a great example of this as well via free agency. When he got the deal that he got for 3 years at $60 million, most people thought it was an overpay. Most just saw Jeremy Grant as a role player, me included. And he surprised everyone. He played much better than expected, showed he could be a 20-point-per-game scorer in the NBA, although it being on a bad team, he can do it, and has much more of an offensive bag than pretty much anyone had foreseen. His value now is much higher than it was when they signed him. Another smart move. Most notably, as of late and at the trade deadline, they acquired Marvin Bagley for not anything significant. The former second overall pick, and is already, in his first couple of games in Detroit, looked better than he's pretty much ever looked, especially over the last couple of years in Sacramento. Looks more engaged. Just looks to be enjoying basketball more, and this box score shows those results. These are the types of moves that can really bring a franchise forward. Sure, you need your Cade Cunningham, who we're going to talk in a minute. You need your star to build around, but picking up these guys on low risk, increasing their value to flip, increasing their value to have productive role players, or maybe even in the case of Marvin Bagley, someone who's more than a role player that you can pick up for relatively low value, is the small moves that no one really talks about, but are important and beneficial in acquiring talent and developing a roster. Of course, the key to any rebuild is your scouting and your drafting. And although the Detroit Pistons are not exactly excelling at an A+ level, they're not doing bad at it by any stretch. Of course, Cade Cunningham's the star they're building around. First overall pick. I'm not giving them credit for that. Sure, they didn't make the wrong pick, but if they selected anyone other than Cade, it would have been a surprise. But he's a good pick. More importantly, Saddiq Bey, very good selection, was a mid to late first round pick, drafted at pick 19 in the 2020 draft. And he looks to be a solid player. Like a solid player. I'm not saying that he's going to be some 20-point per game guy. I think there's some people that think he's going to be some like number 2 or number 3 option on a title team. He's going to be a role player. He's going to be a 3-and-D wing who can create his own shot at times on a competitive roster. But that's a solid player to pick up at pick 19. A lot of pick 19s are busts. A good pick. Saddiq Bey is a good player who has good length, who can shoot, can make threes, can space the floor, and can create his own shot a bit. He's a solid player to add. Isaiah Stewart, similarly, also a non-lottery pick. Picked 16th overall in that same draft. Is not some elite center, but is a fine center for you moving forward, whether he becomes a bench center or a starting center. I think he's a bit on the fringe, but for now, I think he has fine upside to be a fine starting big who can be a fine post defender, has a lot of energy, can rebound very well, and it's still only in year 2. These guys are still only in year 2, and they're already solid contributors. Now, the argument and the elephant in the room is that the Killian Hayes pick doesn't look great yet, and that is fair, and that is a lottery pick that they have missed on potentially. But I would also like to stress, even though I'm personally not that high on Killian Hayes either, he hasn't even played a full NBA season's worth of games yet. He's yet to play 82 games. So give him time. I'm not ready to judge him yet. If at the end of next year we're not really seeing any improvements, that's different. But as of right now, I'm not going to be too harsh on Killian Hayes or the Pistons front office for that one. But Cade Cunningham, money. Saddiq Bey, brilliant pick. Isaiah Stewart, very good pick as well. Their scouting and drafting isn't necessarily propelling them, but it's definitely been good. They have their star. And Killian Hayes, sure, ideally as a lottery pick, you would like him to be a higher quality player. But if he can be a fine backup guard who can play make for you a bit and defend for you a bit, you got 4 pieces to a pretty darn good team moving forward in Bey, Stewart, Killian Hayes, and Cade Cunningham. Did they need to add more still? Yeah, sure they do. But this is at the end of this year, only year 2 of a rebuild where, remind ourselves, they started with nothing. They traded away Luke Kennard to get a first, if I'm not mistaken. That was it. They didn't exactly start with some amazing group of assets. They worked from the bottom up with nothing other than their own picks. So the fact that they are where they are today, kudos to them, because this could have gone a lot worse. But instead, even though they are currently sitting at the bottom of the NBA standings, they're going to have another top 3, top 5 pick this year. They're going to continue to add assets over the next couple of years. And with Cade Cunningham already on the roster, there's potential for this team to be a playoff team down the road if they can continue to draft as they have and continue to acquire low-valued assets and improve their value as they have been. The Pistons haven't been flashy or fancy in any of their moves outside of Cade Cunningham. And outside of that, they don't have any big household names or any future stars. But you only need one elite star to rebuild around. Once you have that star, you just need to continue doing things the right way as they have, add those complementary pieces around and slowly build up their assets, and have Cade Cunningham as the center of it, the center of Detroit Pistons basketball.